Speak of the devil.
And he shall appear before you. Glad to have you, Tex. Quorum is 6, right? Neil, you're muted. Maybe on purpose.
Gonna get a coffee. Basically, yeah, but we're still only 5. Yeah, quorum 6. So we can have a Potter.
I don't believe we have a posted agenda. Do we have items somewhere that I'm not aware of?
No agenda.
Okay. In that case, shall we discuss that the board elections are open? And I suppose we've got that discussion about the questions. Is that reasonable discussion?
The questions are for the technical steering committee elections also coming up, not for the board.
Yeah. I'm aware. I just maybe
Sorry, it's just
articulating that.
Yeah.
When are the committee elections? Are we
October? Running through October.
That's less than a month from now. So, like, when are we getting candidates and running an election so that those of us that are leaving the committee can be off of the committee? Like, I was under the impression it was early October, not the end of October. So it's kind of weird that we would start thinking about these elections less than a month beforehand.
The announcement for the final people, I think, is the 26th of October, if I remember correctly. I'll go check. So the election process runs till near the end, which means that existing members would still be members until the election results. So through October.
Oh, it's through October. Okay.
Well,
yeah, I mean,
so
we can fairly, like as Marcus pointed out, fairly safely remove any references to tendering from the qualifications for the TSC. I can safely say.
Funny how we were all asked to campaign on those qualifications and then told they didn't exist.
Yep.
Sometimes.
TSC. Can our remit just be sour grapes?
Well, I mean, I think we're about to. I mean, there are various technical proposals about to arrive, which could do with a good technical scrutiny, right? So I'm sure there will be, things like linear laos, for example. I have a nice set of technical opinions about its efficacy and its etc. There's going to be plenty of controversy coming up, given that vendors have changed what they're going to do by themselves. Right? That was not what was campaigned on for the money that was delivered. Okay, and I think this is a question that has to be asked: is the community accepts this or not? Right? Right? And I know
is that in reference to the new CIP that was just released a few days ago?
I haven't now been released. I just heard rumors of it.
Yes, it was officially published. I'll get you the link in a second.
Thank you. Right. Yes. So I think there's an interesting capability gap analysis to be made of whether what was proposed and campaigned on for the money and now what is being proposed to be delivered are consistent. And what how does the community feel about the difference? Because if there's any role and there's there are various ways of looking at the proposal. They have made a bunch of decisions. This is the difference between the vendor and the community-driven roadmap. The vendor has made a bunch of decisions which will affect the long-term efficacy of Cardano without any input. Well, they're claiming, right? But they have not had any wider input. Okay?
I have dropped a link to the SIP in chat. It doesn't have an assigned. Oh no, it does 164. There you go, SIP 164. But yes, so the title is. Grab it quickly. Sorry.
What's the technical?
Ouroboros Laos, greater transaction throughput, and their consistent messaging has been that this is like a first implementation that will be expanded upon with further input over time, and it has a lower goal in terms of throughput to begin with, just to get it set up and established. That has been their communication throughout.
Right, and the key question is whether technically that is a good approach. No, because actually, what they have, there is, whenever you build systems like this, okay, there is a, how do I put this? It's almost like we were talking about devils earlier. There's this complete desire to make the throughput go up, whereas actually there are a bunch of big problems you have to solve, like the concurrency. The concurrency is the big problem, right? And actually, by doing what they're doing is they're not attacking the difficult problem; they're pushing that off, and pushing off the difficult problem while making it harder to have any slack to solve that difficult problem, which is what increasing the throughput does, is not usually not usually the right way to do anything in any complex distributed system. So they've made a set of decisions that basically, I think, put Cardano's future in less certainty, not more at risk. Right now, and they've done that. Right, they've done that post taking the money. Right, so the conversation was never had whether this was the thing. I don't think the community, I don't believe the community understands what's been done to them in this process, and that needs to be articulated. So I think if you're gonna note this, concerns were raised about the technical direction of CIP 0164, right, and as to whether this is meeting the long-term needs of is the right approach to meet the long-term needs of Cardano.
I just want to check, because you said yourself you weren't aware that this SIF was published and there were rumors. Are you basing this on the wording of the SIF that you'd seen before?
No, I haven't. I haven't. I have heard. Yeah, I have heard. Yes.
Just want to make sure that it's a feedback to the actual final published text rather than
Give me 2 minutes. Give me 2 minutes, because what I was told is that there was no sharding in this. Yeah, I do not see any concept of sharding, which is actually the key concept needed.
Yeah, to allow for the concurrency you're speaking of, and to ensure that people's experience isn't delayed or latency issues or other problems.
Well, they've yeah. This pays the cost. I mean, at a quick read, right? This pays the cost of all of the voting without being able to extract the benefit of all of that voting. And wait a minute, transactions to the ledger. Load. References. Yeah, there's no the real scalability point, right, was that you could time shift different shards and therefore not have as bursty a computation on each of the CPUs, right? Computers heavy layer. And that's been, as far as I can tell, been lost. I can't see any concept of sharding which would give you that.
The wording does speak of sharding, but it seems to be talking about it in terms of future potential rather than current
And as far as I can see, that's the shard techniques for winning conflicts using sharding. Whereas with aggressive, it mentions it as a future, not as the concern. The technical concern I have is that sharding changes the API, and that is actually going to be the longest term activity you have to sort out. And once you've got the sharding concept sorted in the API and the model working, you could then turn around and create all the other changes under it relatively simply. I.e., you could, you then open up yourself a nice large space in which you can perform technical change, improving throughput without changing the API. What they've done is they've basically shied away from that, and that means that you're going to end up with. It takes a long time for a community to change, and this basically means they're pushing that off into the future. I just don't see it as the right top level technical trade to have made, but that trade is not discussed as far as I can see. They talk about money. They talk about anyway. I think this requires more thinking and more structure. But one of the points that I'm worried about, another point that I'm worried about, is this drives the growth problem, this means that the small guy is going to get pushed out of the ability to run nodes at high speed. So this is a potentially step towards centralization away from decentralization, because the big guy, if you have to have more and more CPU and more memory and disk just to stay up because they've grouped all the computation together and they can't spread it out over time because they didn't do any sharding, this is going to potentially drive the small guy off the reservation as it grows. That's another thing. Okay, I guess that's just saying, and I'm not basically saying that their analysis is that what the arithmetic they've done is wrong, right? Yeah, well, actually, perhaps I am, because actually, the more I look at some of these graphs, they've assumed there's assumptions sitting something like this. There's assumptions sitting that what happens if the equipment needed is 10 times more expensive? That changes the profitability and non-profitability point of this, right? Anyway, so I'll stop there.
Yeah, to be fair, I'll just point out that towards the end of the CIP, which is quite lengthy, they do acknowledge key trade-offs is the heading. And one of those is that this reduces time to market from 2.5 to 3 years to 1 to 1.5 years. So if there were to be a proposed technical pivot for whatever reason, is this not the right way to at least do it? I mean, it's out there, it's public for the community to read. If anybody is technical enough to fully understand and grasp all the complex maths and everything else going on, and the charts and everything else being presented here, and make a well-informed decision, let's say,
yes.
Rather than a.
Well, I think if Duncan was here, Mr. Coutts, he would basically say that he would disagree with that statement of time to market, right? Because actually, the feeling was that and this was actually expressed in the Edinburgh meeting, that a prototype could be done in 18 months. Right now, they're saying 1.5 years of deployment. It wasn't that. Yeah, I'm just saying time to market is one thing, but actually there is no, where's the definite, we're not out of capacity at the moment by a long way. So, it depends on your rate of prediction of the rate of growth as well, doesn't it? Notice this requires modest hardware upgrades. I think the key trade-off, they've identified it requires hardware upgrades. I'm not certain they're as modest as they think they are, right? Notice the latency has gone up by a factor of 2 to 3. And the throughput has gone up by a factor. Okay.
Does that latency mean that? What do we mean when we say transaction inclusion latency?
So again, this is about what you see as important. Work that we've done with other people, they seem to, commercial companies tend to express that the need they want is timeliness as opposed to throughput. From their personal perspective, what they want is timeliness, because each of these steps is part of a larger process. So the longer these steps take, the more inefficient their larger processes are, right? So this basically talks about, because it basically says the clock rate goes from 20 down by a factor of 3. It takes 3 times as long, roughly 2.5 to 3 times as long, to get those those transactions have moved forward. Therefore, I would see that this is would have a negative connotation to business activity, right? No one's actually quantified how much latency is important to these businesses or response time.
So essentially we're saying that the network is capable of a lot more processing power per second, since that's for some reason an industry standard way of judging it. But now if I submit a transaction now, it'll take between 45 to 60 seconds before it's on the chain. Is that what this transaction includes?
If you imagine, the way I'm reading this is, if you imagine there's a sort of, how long do I have to wait for something so that I can do the next step in some larger process, right? And currently that goes up by a factor of 3. That goes up by, currently that's about 20 seconds, and now it'll be about 60 seconds, okay? So I mean, what I'm trying to say is your rate of using the output of that transaction will drop. So if you think this is a chain of transactions, which is what businesses use it for, right? That's going to slow it's going to increase the time constant of that part of the problem.
So any and all serial processes will be slowed down by a factor of 2 to 3, whereas this will allow for more parallel processing to happen.
There can be more of them happening. Yes.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Yes. So the question there is, do you make money? So you may actually find that from the point of view of the thing you are probably trying to avoid here is businesses taking a look at this and saying, I'm going to go, no, I can do it. I need it to be less than 10 seconds or 5 seconds or something. I could live with 20 seconds, but I can't live with 45 in this part of the process. So they go and choose a different chain. That's the risk you take by increasing the latency.
But the experience that people have had during times of congestion has been essentially being in a queue. So they've had the appearance of latency just by waiting to appear in a block, right? So if we go back, I know this is a very old example and it's been mitigated multiple times by better Plutus implementations, but if we go back to the Sunday swap launch, people were waiting multiple days in order to end up being included in a block, but they didn't lose their transaction. It was still waiting.
Right.
So they had the appearance of latency without the actual existence of latency.
No. So I think this is then about experience, right? So this is about, so currently, notice what you said, when it is overloaded. So it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I mean, yes, you've increased the base throughput by a factor, right? But if the point is, now what you're doing is you're paying for that all the time as opposed
Yeah,
to
by everybody having a reduced an
an
increased time
increased
for the
time.
appearance.
But
Yeah.
so you're basically, that trade is now built into this design.
No, definitely. But the thing about it is, you're saying that there isn't the current demand on the network to get to the point of congestion, so there's no need to introduce latency. But that's sort of people have stopped using the chain based on previous bad experiences. Is the social view of that, right? They've come in and they've experienced that queuing experience of being too congested.
But they haven't experienced that in 3 years.
No, it's happened more times than just 3 years ago. There's been launches that have happened on Cardano that have caused issues for people.
Johnny, right? Worst case latency has, ever since the foundation in the name in the person of Carl put together the Canary mechanism. The worst case that I have seen, and I look at when it's busy, was the typical Canary gets in 1 to 2 blocks. That rose to 5 to 6 blocks for a whole half hour, right, in 3 years, right? So I think a lot of this, I'm saying that that meme doesn't, the evidence for the last 3 years doesn't back that up as a problem.
Okay.
Right? And I'm just saying that's, so if you're gonna argue that yes, but the other thing is when the throughput reaches high levels, right? When the saturation does occur, it doesn't. There is this. People will keep saying, well, the way we do it is by keep on increasing the throughput to reduce the delay. But it turns out you can never outrun the massive drops, ever, right? They're effectively DOS attacks, right? They're denial of performance attacks. How's that, right? As opposed to denial of service. So the way you outrun systems in saturation is to have mechanisms for those things that require to be timely, not by building bigger and bigger systems, because you pay the cost all the time, right?
I'm just gonna point out Nicholas has put a comment in chat.
I was reading the document. Wait a minute.
If you want to voice
it. I can
say
it out loud if you want, Tony. I was saying that basically the introduction of high latency is something that was inherent to all the variants of layers. So basically, if we don't want a higher latency, we don't want layers, whatever the flavor it is.
Right. Actually, and do you know something? I think I agree with you. Right?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So what I'm saying is, this is taking a design decision that higher latency is more than acceptable for the throughput, and I am not certain that's the right answer by a long way. Right?
I would say
there's actually a little chart here of Preos proposed layouts, and then what the research paper kind of like
the
optimistically documented.
Right. So from a personal perspective, I was always pointing out that this was increasing delay. Everything that was doing was increasing delay, and nobody wanted to turn around and consider anything different. But I actually think, and I've been trying, because I have a belief. I hate the word belief. I do like doing these. These are not faith-based objects. This is science, right? So I have a hypothesis that basically latency is what really matters in business-to-business transactions. And everywhere else I work, in data networking, in things like that, this is what the case. They want a latency bound at a throughput, not a throughput per se. They need the consistency. And I think that this is potentially not. I think that as they start to do this and analyze it, I'm not certain this is the one answer. Mike?
Your concern, I think, would be the social experience of people just using the chain and not knowing the technical backend. They're going to start seeing that things are slower to get there, and they're going to say, "Hang on, what's happening? Why is my experience less good than it was before?" And they're not going to understand that it allows for more volume of transactions, but they're not going to be happy with that trade-off because their experience is now degraded from what they've experienced before, and they think something's gone wrong with the chain rather than an expansion of its features.
That's the way people see increased delay. Their experience has changed. Right? What they want is a better experience. They do not care to a large extent about the system.
Is a potential way to mitigate this to reduce the amount of time between blocks to sort of balance out that latency issue, because their experience would be the same because more blocks are happening in the same time frame and the latency is balanced out. Now that really puts a strain on how quickly things end up distributed across the system. So that becomes a big question. Like, if you increase the blocks as well as the latency at the same time and do layoffs, then how consistent is the distribution of the blocks going to be in the time frame needed? Delta and all that.
Well, I think we got a reasonable, given the work that we've also done, that can be modelled relatively easily now, or at least right.
Could you increase how often blocks are produced in order to make the user experience not change?
Interesting question, because we could do that with Peras, for example. Imagine we changed the time slot to 10 seconds instead of 20. That would increase the throughput. Right?
Yes, it would.
Okay, and reduce the delay. And that would be nobody would have to change anything. Well, you'd have to check it that all the software, there'd be someone who had built the time constant as a constant in the code. But what I'm trying to say is, that in principle, that should just work. And that would get you to, and we could have bigger blocks. So that might be a more effective use.
The path you're going down there is that we haven't explored all of the optimization potential in the existing protocol setup or the parameters, and actually tweaking them to get the best throughput. It hasn't gone down that path.
So, Nick, do you think, Nick, because you said it's that you seem to be saying that that impact business, not feasibility, but actually, do you consider the impact on business outside our scope?
100%. Otherwise, we won't need a product committee. Business, product can ask us what's the impact of something, and we can give them overview on this. Whether higher latency is important, is a problem or not, whether high throughput is a problem or not, is a product question. It's not a technical question. What we can tell them is what's the impact of a choice on latency and throughput. If we start having the discussion of, is it better to have a smaller, lower latency or a higher throughput, or this kind of questions, it's a product question. It's not a technical question.
Every time we've had this conversation with the product, they ask for technical input. So what is the right position to? I don't want to make a decision here, but I do want to create trade, right? In the sense that when I work with commercial people, we never try to make the decision. What we try to do is make the people who are the decision makers have the informed trade, right? That's what I see as now. Do you disagree with that as an approach?
I don't disagree with that as an approach. I'm just saying that when we start having the discussion of, but having a higher latency is a problem, it's a product take. It's not a technical take.
Adam?
Yeah, I was typing a response, but I'll just say it here for the recording. It is interesting, especially because we've been considering what the Technical Steering Committee's remit is as a committee and why it exists. And we've had this problem also as CIP editors, in that most of us are not, for one, we're all volunteers, so we're not, a bunch of highly paid polyglot, crazy mathematicians. So when you throw something like Ouroboros phalanx or some of these other kind of highly technical papers at us, we can't even make heads or tails of what is actually being said, right? So all we can really do is read it and see if it's formatted in the correct expectations of a CIP. So where I do see that the Technical Steering Committee could provide value is taking these highly technical documents and breaking them down for the lay person, so that somebody like the product committee could be surveying their enterprise customers who either are using Cardano or are interested in using Cardano, and say, look, this proposal presents an A or B choice that we have to make. Now, which one is more important to you, A or B, latency or throughput, essentially? And then, yeah, like Nicholas says, so I do agree, that becomes a product committee question. But the product committee, we can't just point them at the CIP. They won't know what the right questions to ask are based on the CIP, essentially, is what I'm saying. So the TSC could help bridge that gap to the normal person, to make sure, and I believe that was what Neil's original concern was, is that the community doesn't necessarily understand the trade-offs that have been made for this proposed version of Laos versus kind of what was pitched as in the treasury withdrawal and the budget action, was that we're getting Laos as, you know, as it's been presented over the years, which was per the research paper, not necessarily this streamlined and trimmed down version. So that's how this conversation got started. I don't want to necessarily go all the way back there, and Johnny had his hand up first. But so I think there's a happy path here for all of us. And it actually makes the TSC a viable and useful committee to the community. So it's a win all around, even though we may disagree and have two different sides presenting their rationale. But go ahead, Johnny.
Yeah, I was just saying that I think the discussion here and the recording is useful for people who may not understand the SIP as well. So if people refer to this meeting and hear the initial discussion we were having about the user experience, they might not know that slower transaction appearing on chain is the output of implementing Laos. So making sure people know is an important thing to communicate from the committee, I would say. But as you say, we're not making decisions about how things are implemented, and we're not trying to. We're just putting input about what the actual real world impact is, and making sure people are aware of it, and giving suggestions of alternatives to mitigate the latency that will be introduced, but not saying.
I think
I did. I made a suggestion. I said increasing.
The key thing here is you need to create an understanding, and people actually, it's about an informed choice, right? And one of the things I think the community has not had is the information to make the right choice. One of the big concerns I had in the whole Laos development, which I can now talk about, which I actually did point out to everybody inside IOG while it was happening, is that they were not bringing up the downside of the increased delay in their communications. They were only selling it on the higher throughput. They were not selling any of the negative stuff, right? That was not coming out in the public communications. Do you disagree with me, Nicholas? Yeah.
It depends on, I would say it depends highly on what you consider as outgoing communication.
Okay.
Because, for example, all these information were public in any of the monthly we did.
Right, but Annie, then when you got to the PR statements, they were always very candid and very basically the downsides were removed, right? This is something that I might have had a criticism over the years of IOG. Basically, it keeps on selling sugar-coated candy things to the people who read the PR statements, right? And that causes people to have excess expectations, right, for this point, right? I could be that, and that's always a concern for me, because then you end up with backlash when people realize what's actually going on, right?
Okay, but at the same time, it's basically the economical game of the blockchain industry. I don't think you have ever seen Solana claiming that, oh yes, we have high throughput, but we don't have high reliability, and well, our system is fairly centralized.
Right. So what I'm trying to say is that I don't disagree that there's a political framework here, but given if we are to be technically honest, which is I think what our role is to be here, that it is about being, say these trades. Now,
I agree. At the same time, I think that you can be technically honest when you are when you are taking the angle of explaining what a technical solution is, when you are doing a press release, obviously you want to highlight the positive point of something. You don't want to say, oh, we are proposing a new consensus, and by the way, it has these and these negative points, and please come and play with Cardano.
So the thing about, so there is a technical economic interface here that I think is well worth discussing, which is, do businesses don't necessarily make long-term decisions on the basis of press releases, not businesses that survive anyway, okay? They basically look at the details of the stuff. So the key, I think one of the big key questions is how important is time to chain and time to latency stuff to certain business processes, right? And now, as I said, it was my hypothesis that this was actually a driving factor. And it's a hypothesis I keep testing with everybody I talk to, and I've not had it disproved yet, okay? Right? When the people with money worry about this, in my experience over the years. We need to consider, I am concerned, my technical concern here is that the increase in delay will actually make certain business activities no longer viable, or not choose Cardano, right? Now that is that's a techno business concern. You could say, oh, that's the product marketing committee should make that decision, but I don't think that. And what I'm trying to say is, I don't see the risk analysis on that ever having been done. I'll stop there. Sorry, Adam. Right.
Yeah, so just to actually, hopefully get to an actual work output from the technical steering committee here, is it possible that we as a group could make a takeaway that like next week we'll work on bringing, for lack of a better term, objective ELI 5 bullet points on this proposed Leo CIP. Put your feelings to the side, and simply, purely academically, these are the true statements about what is being proposed. And so the technical steering committee has analyzed the proposed CIP. Here is what it will and won't potentially do if implemented as stated. And then we can share that with the wider community, maybe as a comment on the pull request or whatever. And then the community can take it from there. We could advise the product committee that they should, do this polling of business and enterprise grade customers to see. But then our work stream is to just share the facts as they are and as they exist.
And actually, I make a critique of where we think share the facts, but also share the questions as to whether there were issues to do with, this. There's some nice. I've only just read the CIP scanning, and I can read it, but actually there's a whole bunch of deeper questions as to, did this analysis consider this particular faction, right? Yeah. This is the sort of due diligence that I would have expected in our former model, right? I would have expected this sort of CIP to turn up at some part of the effectively of the bidding process, and we would say, great, wonderful. These are the sets of questions we would like to see de-risked as the first stage of your problem of your solution process, please, right? Because actually, I think they still haven't captured all the risks, but that's for us, right? I mean, right?
Johnny, your hand is up.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm trying to make sure that we don't overcorrect. I think Adam's correct. It's factual statements along with open questions. Because if you overcorrect on the negative potential, and then you're going to end up just fighting a press release and not actually being a technical breakdown of what the implications really are. So there needs to be some positives here, because I don't think that the improvement proposal is designed to. It is an improvement in some regard, but just at the trade-off of something else. So I think we need to be very clear and not overly critical, but certainly accurately critical.
Yeah, You know, I know I can sound a bit negative at these things, but all the rest, but I'm taking a devil's advocate position to start off with, right? You know, because there is this. I think there's a lot of interesting questions here, and it's unclear to me. And as I was saying, is yeah, go for it. But actually, I think I'm disappointed, personally disappointed, they didn't go for the concurrency, because I think that's where the long-term problem lies, right?
As you said yourself, the concurrency being introduced would have an effect on APIs, and a lot of existing tooling would need to be upgraded to be able to support that change. But you're saying that the hump needs to be got over as soon as possible so that people can then expand beyond that later on and make it more efficient and better over time. So putting off that hump is a bad thing, in your opinion?
Yeah. Basically, because the way in which things get developed is people have effort to put the initial development funds. If you change the system underneath them at a later date, they typically lost the ability to make those changes cheaply, and therefore they will, right? And therefore, from a commercial perspective, they will completely reevaluate whether this is the right chain or not. Right at that point, you see this in. I've seen this in a whole bunch of other approaches to technical systems. You really need your API. You could tweak the API slightly, but the big, architectural concepts and ideas need to be as close to the front as possible when everybody's excited about implementing it.
So traditionally, this would be described as high upfront cost, long-term benefit. In terms of computational costs, setting up and getting things ready, not actual fiscal costs.
The other thing is that a good model. And a good, well thought out model, well documented and well articulated, actually doesn't. It sounds like, oh, we've got to do it cheaply, and then when the money arrives, we can do it better, right? That doesn't work in this world, because the money, that's the fake it until you make it approach, which doesn't work as well in this type of environment. There's no exit strategy for the individuals to get the money to make it work properly in the end otherwise.
But what I'm saying is, what you're describing is the way to get the hump done first is the equivalent of a high upfront cost in terms of people setting it up, but then there's long-term benefit for having done that. But what seems to have happened with this SIP is an inversion of that, where the cost is going to be later.
And the upfront cost is in thinking, not necessarily in effort. What I'm trying to say is the community wouldn't necessarily pay a lot more. They're going to have to make changes at some point, right? To do some of this stuff.
Yeah.
As Laos is being thought about, the idea was one of the things you deliver initially, you definitely deliver a compatibility layer so that people didn't have to make changes to write against the new Laos, right? So there wasn't, and then they could make that transition to the new API as and when they wanted to, right? This basically seems to have taken that away from them. That's one of the things I want to look at. What's the compatibility? Because once you've gone that your models are compatible, it doesn't matter to some extent how complex the underlying model is, because actually the API is still there. And that's one of the things I will want to be looking at in the document is is this forcing a red letter day on people as an approach? Because that is not the right way to get a sustainable blockchain. Right? These are all the questions that we need to start asking now that this has been produced.
Well, okay. There was no formal agenda, as we know, but we've had a single topic the whole meeting. Is there anything else that anybody needs to bring up?
No, I wasn't.
The disaster recovery fire drill. I guess Kevin would need to be present for that as well, maybe.
So,
I can speak to. I went to the 2030, the product committee's 2030 vision roadmap meeting on Thursday, and essentially the ask there was that the technical steering committee would analyze the proposed let me see exactly how Lorenzo phrased it for the technical steering committee. What do we need technically to reach the 2030 desired state, with a focus on the L1 would be one of the desired outputs of the technical steering committee in contribution to an overall vision steering document that they're working on, which I guess is always going to be more, better, faster, cheaper, right? Essentially, but maybe a little bit too reductive. But so that is something that's going to be coming up in the next month or two, probably. We'll keep hearing about it from the product committee. But I do think that this discussion today is a good starting point for that. You know, how can the technical steering committee contribute technical expertise and advice to the community, and what is the correct pathway to do so? So again, I guess we should, since we have 6 here, quickly, I will formally motion that the technical steering committee will make an objective review of the Laos and probably Phalanx CIPs, and then as a committee together, we'll put together, you know, an ELI 5 document for those that can be published to the CIP's repository as commentary on those proposals, as the technical steering committee's feedback, if everybody is on board and willing to contribute in that way.
Over the next few weeks, what sort of timescale do we have to do? Because I don't think doing it in one.
Not having it all done in 1 week. So, you know, I would like to say, you know, take the next week to at least read and start getting some ideas on Laos, at least, as proposed. Because obviously, if we wait too long, then our feedback is a little bit null and void if we waited 6 months and then we decide to say, hey, by the way, guys. So not waiting too long, but also not rushing it as well. So I would like everybody to at least have maybe an open question or two and some like their objective facts from reading the Laos CIP by next week, so that we can start to kind of as a committee up and down what gets included and what doesn't in the list, and go from there, or, you know, coalesce our points of overlap, so we have a single list of points that need to be made or addressed, if that's of interest to the rest of the committee. Like, so, because obviously I have to do it anyway as a CIP editor, so it's totally up to you guys.
Let's support you, Adam, in that CIP editing process. I think, right? We're not looking here to. I think if we can get some sort of overview as to where we see it strong and weak, what things as a starting point, right? That as opposed to, because I'm already seeing people point out that various features, and I'm sure from that conversation, there are certain memes that will have to be challenged in a part of the process. Okay? So we've had the discussion about the what was it called? No, I'll stop there. Yeah, the Overton window. That's the word I was looking for. We have to move the Overton window.
As an aside, sorry.
Go ahead, John.
As an aside, I've heard the term Overton window mentioned more times in the last 6 months than my entire life. I think Trump has something to do with that. Sorry, that's just some commentary you could go on.
You didn't get that in 2017 when it kind of entered the mainstream discourse?
No, I never. I have to reveal my ignorance, actually. I only heard of the term Overton window in the last number of months because of how often I've heard it in the last couple of months.
Oh, yeah, so, I heard it quite a lot during even the campaign leading up to Trump 1.
Okay, so it seems to be just correlation from the past and the present. But anyway, sorry, that is very not on topic.
No worries. May we be as successful in moving the Overton window in the direction we want as he has been.
Fair enough. But yeah, with that, I will motion to adjourn the meeting and see y'all next week.
Cheers, everybody.
Cheerio, bye, Tata.